Chapter 1 Memories of the Past. The air grew heavy, the silence oppressive. Even the fire seemed to dim, its embers struggling against the weight of the moment. I could feel the beast's presence now, a primal pressure that crawled across my skin like the first whispers of a storm. My instincts, honed by centuries of hunts, screamed louder. Move! Flee! Strike! But I remained still. My bowstring was taut, waiting for the perfect moment. Timing was everything. One misstep, one rushed action, and it would disappear into the night, leaving us to chase the shadows once more. My fingers hovered over the knocked arrow, ready to loose it in an instant. My eyes locked on the faint outline of the beast as it shifted again. The branch beneath it creaked, a soft, agonizing sound that reverberated in the stillness. Then, without warning, it leapt, a blur of motion disappearing into the dense foliage beyond. My heart pounded, but I did not give chase. Not yet. The hunt wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The airship swayed gently beneath me, a rhythmic motion that almost lulled me into distraction as I sat at my desk. The room carried a faint tang of old parchment mingling with something more pungent, the odor of forgotten food, an aroma familiar to scholars who lose themselves in their work. Before me lay a scattered trove of tomes, vellum sheets, and hastily scrawled notes, all part of the meticulous preparation for the hunt. The reports, when they first reached me, seemed innocuous. A village deep within the Wantwood had sent out a plea for aid. Their missive likely was sent in desperation to Aetherhold's guilds. No doubt they hoped some fresh-faced recruit would take the task as a proving ground, sparing the villagers the indignity of paying a proper hunter's price. I couldn't help but shake my head as I reached for another sheet of vellum, setting aside the yellowed tome whose brittle pages had survived centuries of use. The parchment in my hand was a chaos, a mess of fragmented thoughts, revisions, and crossed-out theories that would drive any respectable scholar into madness. Yet it was mine, and it served its purpose. Villagers, in their ignorance, believed themselves the prey of dire wolves. Dangerous, perhaps, to farmers and tradesmen, but for me, such creatures would hardly warrant my time. No, this hunt was something else entirely. Amidst the contradictions and half-truths buried in the reports, one thread wove itself too neatly into the fabric of evidence to ignore. The presence of a chimera. Not just any chimera, but one whose savagery and cunning had long eluded my arrows. A ravenous creature of unnatural origins, likely born from some long-dead wizard's hubris in the chaos following the ley line's eruptions a millennia ago. I had pursued it once before, decades in the past, and that failure, one of the few in my long life, had lingered like a splinter in my pride. I sketched its likeness from memory, the movement as much a ritual as a necessity. Even now I could recall the beast with painful clarity. The hunt had been over a century ago, deep within the Slyvan Soverignities, where towering trees tangled their boughs to blot out the sun. I had joined humans and fellow elves alike, companions as skilled as they were determined. For months, we scoured the trees for any sign of the beast, uncovering only whispers of its presence. Barren stretches of woodlands where no birds sang, heaps of cracked bones, abandoned like discarded tools, and claw marks high in the canopy that spoke of something immense and predatory. It was the 5th month, as my human companions began to falter under the weight of the exhaustion and frustration, that we found the first true sign. A nomadic tribe had crossed the creature's path. Hunters, much like ourselves, preparing to move to more fertile grounds. They never had a chance. We found their village in ruins, their remains left behind like so much refuse. The chimera, I knew, made no distinction between man and beast. To it, all things were prey. My companions wished to stay and perform burial rites for the fallen. A noble sentiment, but one that carried too great a cost. Days spent on funerary customs would allow the beast to vanish deeper into the wilderness, endangering more villagers along this path. With measured words, I convinced them to forego tradition. A pyre would suffice, and we would leave at first light. That night, as I kept watch over the smoldering flames, the acrid scent of burned flesh clung to the air, mixing with the faint metallic tang of spilled blood. The beast's earlier carnage lingered, a shadow over the ruined village. Nyx hung above, her cold, silver light filtering through the canopy and fractured beams, casting jagged shadows that shifted with every flicker of fire. The forest was unnaturally quiet. Not a bird call or insect hum broke the silence, only the low crackle of a dying pyre and the occasional pop of embers. My companions slept nearby, their exhaustion from days of hunting overtaking the grimness of their surroundings. For a moment, I envied their rest, though I knew better than to let my guard slip. I had seen what these creatures could do. I had seen the aftermath. Then it came, a ripple through the stillness, the faintest shift of branches, almost imperceptible, as though the forest itself held its breath. My ears caught the sound long before my eyes found it, a soft clatter of paws against wood, deliberate and measured. I froze, every muscle taut, my gaze sweeping across the treetops. And then I saw it. A silhouette darting across the canopy, a shadow against the moonlight, too fast and deliberate to be anything but our quarry. It moved with unnerving grace, silence save for the occasional snap of branch beneath its weight. My instinct screamed at me to act, to warn my companions, but experience stained my hand. To sound the alarm now would only alert the beast that it had been spotted, driving it deeper into the forest and further from our reach. Instead, I gripped my bow tighter, feeling the faint thrum of magic beneath my fingers. My breath slowed, my senses sharpening as I focused on the shadow. It moved again, closer this time, its form partially visible through the gaps in the canopy. I caught a glimpse of its wings, bat-like, membranous, their edges catching the faint light of Nyx as they shifted. The creature paused, crouched on a thick branch, and for a moment, it seemed to study us. The air grew heavy, the silence oppressive. Even the fire seemed to dim, its embers struggling against the weight of the moment. I could feel the beast's presence now, the primal pressure that crawled across my skin like the first whispers of a storm. My instincts, honed by centuries of hunt, screamed louder. Move, flee, strike. But I remained still, my bowstring taut, waiting for the perfect moment. Timing was everything. One misstep, one rushed action, and it would vanish into the night, leaving us to chase only shadows once more. My fingers hovered over the nocked arrow, ready to loose it in an instant. My eyes locked on the faint outline of the beast as it shifted again. The branch beneath it creaked, a soft, agonizing sound that reverberated in the stillness. Then, without warning, it leapt, a blur of motion disappearing into the foliage beyond. My heart pounded, but I didn't give chase. Not yet. The hunt wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Moving with deliberate care, I aimed my bow. Its steel leaf handle thrummed faintly beneath my fingers. A familiar resonance of magic waiting to be unleashed. What felt like hours passed, but finally the moment came. The beast returned, landing on a branch high above, and I loosed my arrow, its flight swift and as true as the thought that guided it. The strings sang through the night as my voice followed an instant later. "To arms! The cubs are upon us!" A yelp pierced the darkness, and a body tumbled from the canopy above, crashing through the branches to the forest below. The camp erupted into motion. Hunters, man and elf alike, leaped from their makeshift beds. Years of stalking monsters had trained their bodies to react faster than thought. My insistence on resting in the homes of the fallen, though distasteful to some, proved its worth now. The buildings offered cover as my companions snatched up their weapons, the echoes of tiny howls rising through the village like a ghostly chorus. At first the cries were like those of wolf pups, high-pitched, scattered, and searching, but then came the distortion, a subtle unnatural warping of sound that clawed at the edges of my instinct. I knew better. These were no wolves. I moved swiftly towards the creature I had shot, bow still in hand, eyes scanning the treetop for any sign of movement. The abomination lay sprawled before me, a grotesque mixture of nature's design and twisted experimenter's imagination. It resembled a wolf pup, but vibrant, almost sickly colors stained its fur, and a massive pair of bat-like wings jutted awkwardly from its back. Its tail, however, was no tail at all, but a serpent, a thrashing viper that snapped at my ankles with venomous fury. I stepped just out of reach and inspected my kill. My arrow jutted from its chest, piercing the heart cleanly. Even if the creature's warped body might have survived such a wound, the magic within the arrow ensured otherwise, siphoning the last dregs of life from its form. It was dead. The serpent hissed one last time, lunging weakly before I silenced it with a sharp crunch underneath my boot. Around me, hunters spilled from buildings, the humans lighting torches and hurling them into the tree line to illuminate the battlefield. My elvenkin scanned the shadows, their keen eyes trained for movement, anticipating any abomination using the cover of darkness to strike. "Two gloomings, south!" Eldrin's voice rang out, sharp and sure. The twang of bowstrings followed, arrows slicing through the air with deadly precision. Moments later, the howls of pain confirmed their aim. "One dead, one injured, circling west!" he called again. I turned, my gaze sweeping the underbrush until I spotted the wounded creature. It crashed through the undergrowth, its injury leaving a trail of broken branches and scattered leaves in its wake. I drew a breath, steadied my aim, and released. The rustling stopped. A sharp, high-pitched grunt marked the end. I didn't need to see the body to trust the magic and my bow to finish the job. Then I caught them, 3 figures flitting through the treetops, their wings silhouetted against the pale, baleful light of Nyx. "3 above!" I shouted, knocking another arrow and loosing it in one smooth motion. The projectile stuck into one of the creature's gut, the force of the impact sending it spiraling to the ground. "Watch your aim!" I added, a reminder that none of us wanted to test fate by falling victim to a misplaced shot. More arrows whistled to the air, hunters calling out their warnings and targets as they identified more gloomlings. The torchlight spread, casting flickering shadows that danced alongside the silver gleam of Nyx's light, creating an eerie glow across the battlefield. As I scanned the perimeter, I noted 2 situations. Eldrin and his group to the south were dealing with 2, nearly dispatched. The west was secure, a human already taken down a gloomling with his bow. The east, 2 flyers there, struggling to land a hit but keeping them contained. Then came the crash. The sound split the night like a thunderclap, a monstrous weight snapping through the trees. Shouts of terror erupted from the south, and I turned instinctively, loosing an arrow as I moved. Too late. I caught only a glimpse of the massive form before the sickening crunch echoed through the camp. Eldrin's shout was cut short, swallowed by the night. The beast had claimed its first life. I shoved the sketch aside, the memory still raw even after all these years. 9 men died before we drove it off. I had been foolish then, unaccustomed with working with others, and my arrogance had cost them their lives. Precautions I should have taken, plans I should have made, might have saved them all. 9,000 gold. That's all it would have taken to bring them back. But we were weeks from the nearest city, far too late to preserve the bodies for the Resurrections Guild. No one had the scrolls, and we all knew it. Their deaths were final. I let out a solo breath, rolling the memory over in my mind as I packed my tomes and scrolls into my abyssal bag. Every detail had been etched into my thoughts, sharp as the day they occurred. This time, though, it would be different. This time, I would not fail. Grasping my bow, I felt a comforting thrum of magic in my palm, steady and familiar. My life had been dedicated to hunting these abominations, proving my skill as a hunter. And this time, I would make no mistakes. The chimera would no longer stain my legacy. My prey awaited. The Skarlgloom. Chapter 2. The Follies of Youth. 2 weeks had passed since the airship docked at Varenspire, the nearest settlement of note. I consulted my map once more, comparing it to the splintered remains of a roadside marker, satisfied that Dren Hollow lay no more than 2 days ahead. The trail narrowed as I pressed deeper into the woods, the air growing heavier, the usual din of birds and insects fading until only the restless sigh of the wind remained. Even rogue direwolves did not quiet a forest so utterly. I caught a disturbance out of the corner of my eye, a rough patch of torn earth, half hidden beneath a drift of brittle leaves. Kneeling, I brushed the debris aside, fingers sifting through the dry, cracked soil. Massive paw prints marred the clearing, each indentation deep and ragged, as though whatever had passed through had been wounded or desperate. Then the stench hit me. I rose slowly, knife in hand, and followed the foul air to its source. A direwolf's corpse lay, crumpled ahead. The surrounding ground churned and blood-stained. Its massive frame had been brutalized, fur matted and torn, the earth gouged by claws scrabbling for purchase in a losing fight. I circled the body cautiously, each step measured. The fatal wound was obvious. The throat had been ripped out by a single crushing bite. Death had come swiftly, but the story didn't end there. Along the direwolf's flank, the flesh had collapsed into blackened rot, far too advanced for a body only days dead. I knelt again, narrowing my eyes at the corruption. Twin puncture wounds, deep and precise, sat near the heart of the decay. I traced them lightly with the tip of my knife, careful not to touch the festering edges. A Skarlgloom's venom. There could be no mistake. My breath slowed as I continued the examination. Smaller wounds peppered the wolf's back. Shallow bites clustered high, as if half a dozen creatures had swarmed from above. I angled my body to study the ground beyond, a chaos of tracks, some wolf, something else, clawed and narrow, scuttling. Here, near the torn earth, the direwolf must have staggered, tried to flee, its blood splattering the undergrowth in frantic arcs. There the ground showed where the Skarlgloom must have lunged, its weight bearing the wolf down. I followed the marks without thinking, building the battle second by second, feeling the desperation of it settle into my gut like a stone. The direwolf had fought alone, it had died alone, and its killers had not feasted, driven off perhaps by the wolf's pack, who had arrived too late to save it. I stood slowly, dread curling my stomach. If the Skarlgloom had turned its eyes to prey as dangerous as this, desperation gnawed at it. And desperate predators rarely stayed long in the wilds, when easier quarry waited behind village walls. I scanned the tree line, listening for some sign of the beast, but the woods only answered me with silence. I approached the village by mid-morning, feet aching from the pace I had set. For a woodland settlement, it was larger than expected. Rows of timber homes stood beyond a wooden palisade that ringed the town like a spine. After days of oppressive silence in the forest, the distant murmur of voices struck me like a sudden gust of wind, jarring but not unwelcome. A lone guard hastily let me through with a brief exchange. The village had been on edge, sealing its gates against threats prowling the woods. Direwolves, he had said, had already claimed lives. Inside, the village square was easy to find. Voices rose in furious debate, echoing down timbered lanes.
"We cannot wait for charity. We must act."
"And throw ourselves to the beast's fangs? 12 dead already. Would you send children next?"
"Better to die fighting than to starve cowering."
I slipped through the crowd without a word, noting pallid faces and thin frames. Those bearing weapons looked less gaunt, the grim reality of survival. As I reached the front, I saw a girl, young, perhaps 17, step forward, red hair like fire in the sun. A sickly child clung to her skirts, likely a younger sister. An old man seated in a carved chair raised a hand, stilling the argument for long enough for her voice to carry.
"Even if we cannot face the beast directly," she said, "let us send hunters to gather food, or messengers to trade. My sister won't survive this hunger, and other children, they'll suffer for life if this goes on."
I stepped into the open. My words came sharp, perhaps too sharp. "You won't find game. The forest has been bled dry. Any hunting parties you send would only feed the thing killing your people." Surprised inhalations followed. I looked directly at the man who called for the armed retribution. If it were direwolves alone, perhaps your plan would hold merit, but I've seen the evidence. This is not a simple infestation. The old man, presumably the elder, squinted up at me. His voice creaked like old timber.
And who are you, elf? You wear hunter's tools. Are you here to answer our summons?
I inclined my head, gaze sweeping over the villagers. I loathed spectacles like this, but letting people rush to suicide out of pride, that would be on me. I saw the posting in Aetherhold. The details didn't align with the direwolf pack. There were mentions of small game carcasses, meat stripped, marrows cracked. That's not wolf behavior. From my astral bag, I retrieved the severed direwolf leg, raising it for all to see. A hush fell. You do have direwolves, yes, but something far worse hunts them. This wound, I pointed to the blackened snakebite and the spidering lines of necrosis, comes from a creature with a serpent head for a tail. Its venom rots flesh within hours. I let the silence grow heavier. A beast with the body of a direwolf, the wings of a bat, and the serpent for a tail, a monster that cannot be felled by ordinary blades. An apex predator designed by malice itself. A Skarlgloom. A man near the back echoed a question that had already begun forming in the minds of everyone present.
A what?
I was forced to endure another hour of frantic questioning from panicked villagers before I could make my exit from the town meeting. Just as I turned to press the elder for information, the red-haired woman from earlier intercepted me, this time with a boy at her side and a sickly girl in tow. Desperation blazed in her eyes.
Wait! I didn't want to say this in front of everyone, but how long will it take you to hunt this thing?
I studied her, then glanced at the pale child clutching her hand. The resemblance was unmistakable. Your sister, I take it?
Huh? Oh yes, Sir Elf. This is Sarah. She's got the wasting sickness, and she's been getting weaker since the rationing started. The other kids are suffering too. They can't go this long without food.
Against my better judgment, I offered an estimate. Perhaps to calm, perhaps to discourage rash choices. There's no precise way to measure a hunt. At best, a week. More likely, 2. Panic flickered across her face. It struck me then. My elven sense of time had failed me. What felt like a short delay to me must have sounded like a death sentence for her.
She won't last that long,
her voice cracked. She turned to the elder, searching for some alternative. He began gently.
Sparks, we must have trust in the hunt.
I am trusting him, but if his estimate is right, it'll be too late. Let me go. I can help. I know some magic. I found a spellbook years ago, and I've been practicing. If this creature finds me, I might be able to drive it off. And if it's just a local land that's been hunted out, I'll go further.
The boy, really more of a youth, nodded beside her.
I'll go too. Protect her. We can bring others.
I cut in, voice colder than I intended. I don't speak for your elder, but I will say this. The Skarlgloom and its spawn grow more desperate by the hour. I've spent centuries honing my abilities to pass unseen. Your people haven't. They'll be hunted. I turned to Sparks, leveling my gaze. You may have magic, but you're no match for this creature. I'll make my move soon. If I haven't slain it in a few days, I'll return and see what can be done for your sister. She hesitated. The elder, seeing his chance, spoke firmly.
No, Sparks. The hunter is right. I'll see to it your sister gets an extra ration. But I forbid you from leaving. You too, John. I won't have you throwing your lives away.
Sparks looked like she was ready to argue, but her sister tugged her sleeve.
I can have an extra ration?
The child asked, eyes wide with cautious hope. The elder seized the moment.
Of course, Sarah. Go now, both of you. Tell the quartermaster I sent you, but be quiet about it.
He winked at the child. She lit up and began dragging her sister towards the storehouse. I turned back to the elder and began walking. I do not envy the burden you bear. Let's speak of the attack, when they began, and where they first struck. The meeting proved fruitful, and within an hour I had departed the village once more, slipping beyond the palisades and into the hush of the woods. The silence was deeper now, not merely stillness, but a hollow quiet that clung to every trunk and branch. The usual sounds, birds, insects, the distant patter of movement, were all absent, as though the forest itself held its breath. I stalked the well-worn hunting paths, favored routes of men who had gone missing. Though thickly blanketed with fallen leaves, the hardened soil beneath, pressed firm by decades of passage, betrayed their presence to one who knew what to seek. Time slipped by, unnoticed as I moved from trail to trail. Dusk surrendered to night, and the world turned into shades of silver and shadow. Nyx and Seraph, the twin moons, were nearly obscured, and offered only the faintest illumination. It was in that dim, near-featureless light that I nearly missed it. A length of trail ahead, interrupted only by the pale jut of broken bone, barely rising above the loam. I crept closer, crouching low beneath the gnarled boughs as I brushed aside the leaves and earth. The bone continued downward, and as I dug, more emerged. Cracked femurs, shattered ribs, fragments of spine. There was no mistaking it. These were the remains of an adult human, most likely male, though the absence of a skull made certainty difficult. More disturbing was how the bones had been split apart, the marrow salvaged. Wolves scavenged. Dire wolves may crush bones in desperation, but this pattern, this deliberation, felt different. The Skarlgloom's cubs. Gloomlings, that was my wager. Marking the location in my mind, I scaled the nearest tree, testing each branch as I climbed. Gloomlings rarely remained grounded for long. They preferred to haunt the treetops, moving from limb to limb like shadows with wings. The first 3 trees offered nothing, but the fourth, there, a branch bent and broken, the splintered wood angling away from the trail below. A launch point. From that tree I began a meticulous slow crawl through the canopy. Broken twigs, scored bark, a shift in the moss where claws had dragged across the trunk. Subtle signs, but enough. Gradually a pattern emerged, a path. And with that I moved, silent and swift, gliding through the branches in pursuit of a trail few others would have ever seen. An arboreal hunt began. It was near dawn when the trail at last reached its end. Hours spent traversing treetops, leaping from branch to branch, had taken their toll. Even my frame, honed by centuries, felt the weight of exhaustion. The path concluded at the mouth of a cave, half swallowed by thick vines. They pulsed faintly with ghostly light, the pale blue glow casting shifting patterns across the moss-covered stone. A mound of bones lay heaped before the entrance, with the shattered skull of a bear resting prominently atop the pile. I exhaled slowly and climbed once more to the canopy. Nestled amongst the boughs of a towering oak, I wrapped my cloak tightly around myself. The runes stitched into the lining flickered faintly, and with the whisper of old magic, the colors of the fabric bled away, replaced with the mottled greens and browns of the surrounding woods. And then I waited. The sun arced and fell again before anything stirred. It was nearly dusk when the silence broke. A chorus of sharp yelps and high howls echoed from the cave mouth, bouncing against the stone like laughter in a tomb. Shadows began to shift under the weight of the etheric light. In a sudden burst they emerged. Wolf-sized shapes, a flurry of snarling motion. They sprinted from the cave in a tangle of snapping jaws and swiping claws. Bat-like wings flared sporadically, launching some of them a few feet into the air before they clumsily landed once again. Where their tails should have been, vipers danced, striking at one another with bared fangs. One sank its teeth into the haunch of one of its siblings, drawing a yelp and a retaliatory swipe. I slowed my breath and remained still, the cloak clinging to me like a second skin. As the gloomlings poured forth, they began to fan out, taking to the trees and trails. My hand drifted to the hilt of the enchanted dagger at my hip, as one of the creatures leapt into the very tree I had chosen for my cover, not a yard from where I crouched. It paused. Unlike its kin, it did not dash off. Instead, it raised its snout to the air and sniffed. The serpent at its tail coiled, flicking its tongue, tasting the air. Slowly the snake rose higher, angling upwards towards the branch just above me. I remained motionless, muscles coiled. A single strike and I could end it, but that would summon the Skarlgloom itself, and I was not ready for that confrontation. The moment stretched. Then suddenly the glooming snapped at its own tail, barking at it with a sound of irritation. It turned, bounding up into the branches without a backwards glance. I let the breath I was holding ease out, my gaze shifting to the pathways the others had taken. I watched carefully, noting the patterns of their dispersal. One by one they vanished into the trees, and yet the cave remained still. The Skarlgloom did not emerge. I lingered, cloaked and silent for hours longer. Slowly they returned. The gloomlings came slinking back from the woods, blood matted into their fur, small corpses clutched in their maws or paws. Despite the apparent emptiness of the forest, they had found prey. I had seen no life, no sound in the woods, and yet they had hunted successfully. Efficient, ruthless, and relentless. The spawn of the Skarlgloom were born predators, and the forest, though emptied, had not yet starved them out. Under normal circumstances, I would have preferred days, perhaps a week, to observe, to study patterns, to prepare a proper hunt. But each day wasted was another day the villagers might grow desperate enough to act on their own. Desperation breeds recklessness, and I had no intentions of letting them ruin the hunt. So, without having even laid an eye on the Skarlgloom itself, I left my perch and began scouting the hunting paths the gloomlings had taken the day before. If I could identify the route favored by their mother, I could lay traps, designed not only to cull the brood, but to weaken her as well. Hours passed in tireless pursuit of subtle signs. Gouged bark, disturbed moss, broken branches, any trace of movement. The sun dipped towards the horizon again when a rustle drew my attention. I dropped low into the thicket, breath stilled, cloak dimming my form against the underbrush. Through the trees I saw one of the gloomlings. It prowled along the arboreal path, pausing now and again to raise its snout and sniff. The serpent at its tail mirrored the motion, tasting the air with eerie synchronicity. It was hunting. I watched with intent, committing every detail to memory. This, at least, confirmed the roots were active. By my estimation, I had 2 days, perhaps less, before I would be forced to return to the village for rest. Magic could stave off fatigue, but only to a point. Once I began killing the gloomlings, the Skarlgloom would sense a threat. She would grow hostile, perhaps reckless. That would work in my favor, if I was ready. This trip would be spent preparing. After I recovered, I would return to set traps along their hunting paths. Snares, spring-loaded spikes, wards laced with venom. Some designed to kill, others to maim. One, at least, meant to capture. Because if I could capture a gloomling, the mother would come. My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden chilling sound. A cacophony of howls erupting through the forest. The gloomling I had been watching stiffened, then threw back its head and added its own voice to the chorus before launching itself into the trees. They had found something worth hunting. My stomach sank, and instincts took over as I broke into a sprint through the trees. The gloomling was fast, its wings letting it glide effortlessly through the canopy, skipping the tangled undergrowth I had to navigate by foot. Still, centuries of experience had allowed me to keep pace, more or less. It widened the gap with each second, but only slightly. Direwolves were long gone, and any other apex predator would have been devoured or driven off. Rodents or small prey wouldn't trigger a coordinated pack hunt like this. Whatever the gloomlings had found, it was something they saw as worth killing together. As I vaulted a fallen tree, an intrusive thought crossed my mind. Whoever was reckless enough to ignore my warnings probably deserved what was coming. Let them die. Better than risking the entire village. But the thought didn't linger. I had a reputation to maintain, if nothing else. We crossed hundreds of yards in minutes. The forest remained eerily quiet except for the soft rustle of the gloomling ahead and the distant howls echoing through the woods. Then came the scream, sharp, human, full of panic, followed by a sound of a man howling in pain. A clearing opened up ahead. The gloomling dove into it. My hand found my bow. Fools! There was no time to think, only to act. I burst into the clearing. The arrow was already nocked, already loosed before my boots hit the ground. It struck home, Mid-lunge, the gloomling shrieked in pain as the arrow tore through its ribs. The creature slammed into the dirt, skidded forward, coming to a halt at the feet of a red-headed girl. Everything slowed. The clearing reeked of blood and scorched meat. The boy, John, lay in the grass, throat torn open, necrotic veins crawling up his arms. His skin was blistering already. Another gloomling lay dead beside him, a shattered spear buried in its gut, its head blackened and burned. The girl, Sparks, was trying to cast again, hands shaking with heat and panic. Her fingers crackled with unstable fire, but she couldn't hold the spell. As the dead gloomling came to a stop near her feet, she shrieked and stumbled back. The spell burst apart with a violent pop, sparks and flames exploding from her palm before fizzling into smoke. She screamed again. Another gloomling crouched at the forest edge, legs burning, muscles coiled beneath matted fur. Its wings twitched in anticipation. Two more crept through the undergrowth behind the girl, fangs bared. Others waited beyond them, too many shapes, too many eyes watching. They're too fast. If I reach for another arrow, I might take one down, two if I'm lucky, but not before they would tear her apart. No hesitation. I drop my bow, hand already finding the hilt of my dagger as I break into a sprint. She doesn't see me, doesn't hear me. Her gaze locked on the charging gloomling, her body frozen in place. I slam into her side, shoulder first, sending her sprawling to the ground. A heartbeat later, the first gloomling is on me. I duck low, feeling the gust of its wing beats overhead. My dagger lashes upwards, slicing through its throat like parchment. Blood sprays across my arm as the creature crashes behind me. I spin just in time to catch a second one mid-lunge, my forearm driving into its chest, stopping it just short of my face. The force lifts me off the ground. We fly together for a moment before slamming down. Even before we land, I drive my dagger into its ribs, piercing its heart. The impact knocks the wind from me. Its snake-like tail lashes out and sinks its fang into my shoulder pad, but the bite fails to break through. I shove the corpse aside and scramble up. Sparks is crawling towards another tree, her hands glowing faintly as he tries to summon another spell. She won't make it in time. The gloomlings are already on the move, and they know she's the easier kill. This is why you carry steel, even if you wield magic. My legs scream in protest as I push forward into another sprint. One gloomling disappears into the brush, and another barrels towards her, claws tearing the soil, eyes fixed on the kill. A flash of frustration cuts through the pain. I hate tackling prey. It's messy, chaotic, and never ends cleanly. But I don't slow. I leap, slamming to the beast midair. We collide with bone-jarring force. The gloomling pins me beneath it, jaw snapping inches from my throat. I twist, slashing sideways instead of striking forward. My dagger bites into soft, coiling muscle, its viper tail. The blade severs it cleanly, the severed tail twitching away. There's no time to breathe. The gloomling howls and lunges again. I flip my grip and drive the dagger straight into its mouth, the point punching through the soft flesh and into its skull. Blood splashes across my chest. The body spasms and goes limp. A shadow passes over the grass. The missing one. I wrench at the dagger, but it's stuck, lodged too deeply into the bone. I try to roll clear, but I'm too slow. Pain explodes into my leg as the fangs tear into my calf. I feel the armor break. Then the heat of blood as the gloomling shakes violently, trying to rip the limb free. I scream. Fumbling through the haze, I reach back and grab the first thing I find, an arrow, and I jam it into the beast's eye. The shaft splinters under the force, but it works. The creature shrieks and tears away, taking a chunk of muscle and metal with it. It's wounded, but not dead. I pull another arrow from my quiver, forcing myself upright, every nerve on fire. I hear the next one coming before I see it. A twig snapping, the rush of air. Another glooming leaps from behind. I twist, my injured leg nearly giving out beneath me, but the blow never lands. A firebolt slams into the glooming midair, exploding across its flank. The creature hits the ground hard and rolls, and then lies twitching, smoke curling from its charred flesh. The clearing fills again with the acrid stench of scorched meat. Sparks stands beside me, her hands glowing, but her face was pale and tight with fury. I move, if it can be called that. Every step feels like fire eating through my muscles. Still, I limp forward, faster than I should have been able to. My bow lies just ahead. I throw myself towards it, pushing off with my good leg, landing in the roll. I come up with a bow in hand, knock an arrow in one fluid motion, and scan the clearing. 2 gloomlings remain. One, my attacker, is already fleeing, flesh and armor still clutched in its jaw. The other is larger than the rest, hovering just above the ground, wings laboring as it begins to ascend, with the boy's body dangling beneath it. I only have time for one shot. If I let the one that bit me go, the Skarlgloom will have my scent, jeopardizing everything. There may not be enough of him left for the resurrections to work with. He chose to come out here. He knew the risk. I release. The arrow whistles through the air and strikes true, burying itself deeply into the creature's ribs. It tumbles in midair and crashes into the dirt, the boy's body flung beneath it, limbs splayed and lifeless.
John!
Spark's voice cuts through the clearing as she rushes forward, stumbling through blood and ash to reach him. I breathe ragged and shallow. Pain pulses from my calf with each heartbeat, and my fingers tremble where they rest on the bowstring. The hunt had just become much more complicated. Chapter 3. The Skarlgloom. The girl called Sparks sobbed again. Her cries rang through the clearing, sharp and unrelenting. Part of me flinched. Any predator with its fangs would hear that as the dinner bell. But I forced the thought aside. Telling her to stop would not silence the sound, and any creature brave or foolish enough to step into a clearing full of dead gloomlings would catch the scent of blood long before they heard her voice. I turned from the noise and hobbled to the tree line, every step tugging at the ragged wound in my leg. The poultice packed into the gash began to tingle, the enchanted herbs teasing my flesh to knit itself back together. Even after centuries, I've yet to grow comfortable with the sensation. It stings like cold fire trying to teach nerves how to feel. It didn't take long to find 2 suitable branches. Sturdy, straight enough. I stripped them clean with my dagger and returned to the clearing. Sparks knelt beside John's body. Her hands pressed hard against the deep wound in his side. Blood seeped between her fingers in sluggish dark rivulets, matting the fabric beneath her touch. She shifted her grip now and then, as though trying to block the flow, but without cloth, skill, or even the sense to keep steady pressure, she only smeared the blood further. Even if he still clung to life, her fumbling would do him no good. I watched for a moment, considered letting her continue. If nothing else, it kept her occupied. But she was already sweating, her breaths ragged and shallow. She'd collapse soon, and I needed her moving. I called out to her. "Stop! You're accomplishing nothing!" The words came out harsher than I intended. I felt the sting in them, but it didn't soften my tone. "He's already dead. If you want to be useful, find vines, and strong ones." She didn't answer right away, just kept her hands pressed against the wound for a moment longer, before freezing, the truth sinking in. Her face was wet, her skin pale as wax. For a heartbeat, I thought she might crumble where she knelt. But then she swallowed, her jaw tightening. "Okay," she rasped, her voice raw from grief. She staggered to her feet and turned towards the wood. Good. If she could still follow orders, there was a chance she'd survive the night. We worked in silence save for the occasional snap of wood and hiss of damp leaves underfoot. The first drops of rain began to fall, light and cold against my skin. Thunder rolled somewhere far off, a low growl that promised worse to come. When Sparks returned with the first bundle of vines, I began lashing the poles together, working quickly but methodically. From time to time, I sent her back for more branches, shorter ones, to brace the weight. As I tightened the knots, I spoke. "This is a travois," I said, voice low. "It'll help you drag John's body back to the village. You'll make better time with it, and it won't tear the corpse apart along the way." She paused, vines clutched in her arm. "Wait, you're not coming back too? You're injured." I waved the words away like smoke, cinching the last binding into place. Then I hauled the frame over to John's body and knelt beside him. "The Skarlgloom will have caught my scent by now," I said, as I shifted his cooling form onto the travois. "We killed its offspring, several of them, and it is not a creature known for its forgiveness." Her silence told me she understood. I began tying his limbs into place, firm enough to hold him steady, gentle enough not to snap bone. I considered using rope, but thought better of it. I might need that for the hunt ahead. If I go with you, it will follow. We'd still be halfway to the village when it caught our trail, and then neither of us would make it. I reached into the abyssal bag slung at my hip and withdrew a tightly wound scroll. Spark's eyes locked onto it, her breath catching. I laid the scroll across John's chest and spoke the activation phrase. A soft glow spread across the body like morning light over frost. But that was all. No spark, no motion. She frowned as the scroll blackened and crumbled to ash. What did you do? A scroll of preservation, I replied. It will keep the body from decaying. More importantly, it preserves the link between flesh and soul, for a few days at least. Long enough for me to kill the Skarlgloom and see him delivered to the capital for resurrection. Wait, resurrection magic is real? Her voice trembled with sudden hope, her grief momentarily forgotten as she stepped closer. I thought it was just something rich folk came up with. Some lie to remind the rest of us that we were replaceable. Isn't it expensive? The light in her eyes flickered, then dimmed with the weight of her own words. I've only got a few coppers saved. I sighed internally, of course, as I prepared to explain the plan. People always overreact. They assign meaning to things best left practical. With any luck, I could frame this as a business, not a charity. Don't trouble yourself about the cost, I said flatly. He died while standing at the edge of my contract. If word spreads that someone perished on my watch, it tarnishes my reputation. I intend to see that corrected. I glanced up just in time to see her face lighten up, wide-eyed with joy and foolish relief. I groaned. She took a step forward, arms already raising, likely with some absurd intention of embracing me. I raised mine first and caught her square in the chest with my forearm, holding her firmly at bay. Thank you so much, she gasped as she collided with the barrier I had become. Avoid touching me, I said coolly. The Skarlgloom will track me by scent. I'd prefer it not catch yours as well. A half-truth at best. The odds of it picking up her scent from a brief embrace were negligible. But being the subject of sincere gratitude was already more discomfort than I cared for. Oh, right. Of course. She stepped back, face flushed, eyes on the ground as she scuffed the dirt with her boot. Still, the weight that seemed to drag down her frame earlier, the guilt and despair, seemed to ease. A little hope could do that. Dangerous stuff, really. I let her have it. While she gathered herself, I knelt near a patch of underbrush, harvesting what I needed. For the next 10 minutes I worked in silence, fingers grinding damp herbs into a pungent paste. The rain had picked up, steady now, tapping against the leaves and skin alike. When the mixture was ready, I pushed the mortar towards her. It's a masking blend, I said. Shadow moss, nighttime, and crushed fen spore. Rub it across your skin and clothes. Then use the remainder on the boy. It should dull your scent as you move. She obeyed without question, spreading the gritty paste over her arms and cloak. The smell was earthy and sharp, like wet stone mixed with moss. The village is east, I continued, watching her work. Stay on the path where it's worn down. Don't cut through the brush. Move slowly. Rest when needed. The boy weighs more than you, and while the travois will help, it won't carry itself. I reached into my abyssal bag and withdrew one of my spare elven daggers. Its mithril blade shimmered faintly, etched with runes that caught the ambient magic like dew on spider silk. I approached her as she smeared a poultice over the boy's body and offered the weapon to her, handle first. The mother will be hunting me, I said. Her spawn, if any remain, will likely follow, but that doesn't preclude the possibility of one of them circling back to you. Her eyes rose to mine, wide but steady. If something finds you, 15 paces or more, use your magic. Keep at a distance, but if it closes the gap, don't waste your time with casting. Use this instead. She took the dagger, hands trembling just slightly. An enchantment will let you slip through the hide without the need for brute strength. Speed and precision are your allies. Aim for the eyes, the base of the jaw, the underarm. Here. I crouched beside her and gestured with deliberate clarity, tracing the weak points shared by most creatures. and those particular to the Gloomling's twisted anatomy. She listened, focused, committing each word to memory like a student at a temple. If all else fails, I added, stab wherever you can. When the enchantment leeches life from the creature regardless of where the blade strikes. Sparks didn't speak. She merely nodded, eyes fixed on the weapon now in her grip. That was all I could give her. Every precaution, every measure taken. Return to your village, I said. Find the elder, tell him everything. She paled at the command. I could almost hear the wheels of anxiety turning behind her silence. If I fail to kill the Skarlgloom, it will come for the village next. The people must be prepared. Their steel won't pierce its hide, and only your magic will harm it. Make sure the elder understands that. Do not let them scatter. Fleeing will only make them easier prey. She swallowed, and then nodded. Oh, okay. I understand. Good, I said, rising. Then go. As sparks disappeared into the tree line, I turned my gaze skyward. The storm clouds churned above me, thick and brooding. The rain, once a light scatter, had settled into the steady downpour that kissed the canopy and drummed against my hood. I stood beneath it in silence, letting the cold water soak through the tears of my cloak as I sifted through the tangled strategies in my mind, discarding most of them outright. I had crafted dozens of plans for the Skarlgloom, some elegant, some brutal, but with my scent now marking the air, none of them mattered. The beast would come. Of that, there was no doubt. And it would not stop until one of us was dead. So be it. I exhaled through my nose and closed my eyes, steadying my breath as the rain washed over me. The tension left my shoulders slowly, replaced by grim focus. Tonight, the hunt would end. I limped towards one of the Gloomling corpses, its twisted form half curled in death. The weight of the creature dragged against my recovering leg as I hoisted it up, but I bore it in silence, careful not to tear open my mending wound. Each step was measured, deliberate, until I reached the clearing not far from where Sparks had nearly died. It was wide, several yards across, surrounded by ancient trees with thick overhanging branches. A good kill site, clear lines of sight, high boughs to conceal traps. The earth was firm enough to hold its shape beneath runes or stakes. I laid the Gloomling's corpse in the center, letting it sprawl unnaturally across the moss. Its wings were still half extended, its serpent-like tail limp in the mud. The message was simple. This was where its bloodline ended. I stepped a few paces further in and began removing my bloodied greaves, the leather stiff with half-dried gore. I set them down with quiet care, positioning them near my body, bait layered in scent. If the Skarlgloom was tracking me by smell, this would be the trail it would follow. From my abyssal bag I withdrew another scroll. This one bore bright azure runes that pulsed faintly against the parchment. As I ran my finger down the glyphs, a cold breath of air stirred against the surface. The magic recognized my intent and began to wake. I crouched before my greaves and unrolled the scroll into the wet earth. Its face angled towards the fallen Gloomling. My fingers brushed over the runes as I muttered the activation phrase. Ithilvanei Luth. The parchment vanished in a flash, leaving the luminous sigils suspended in the air for a heartbeat before they bled into the soil, fading into nothing. I committed the exact position into memory. Every trap I lay I remember, in case it is not the Skarlgloom who finds them. It would be cruel irony to save a village only to bury one of their hunters in an icy grave of my own making. I returned to the edge of the clearing, to the spot where I had first entered. The ground was soft here, marked with the scent of blood, crushed moss, and broken twigs. This would be the path the beast would follow, either drawn in by the remnants of its offspring or by the scent trail I'd left behind like breadcrumbs. From my bag, I withdrew a small pouch and pulled free a handful of metal caltrops, each glinting faintly with oil. Before casting them out, I uncorked a vial of varium extract, its liquid surface swirling with an unnatural sheen. Harvested under the full moon, the toxin had matured into a potent paralytic. I dripped each caltrop briefly into the extract, counting them one by one as I tossed them into the undergrowth in a careful scatter. Not fatal, but enough that would render a leg useless for hours. It would be kinder to die by the jaws of a monster than to lie helpless, pinned by a poisoned shard of iron. Next came the snares. I moved further into the brush, my fingers already feeling for a garrote vine I had coiled months ago. Tough, fibrous, and all too eager to constrict once tension was applied. I wound it low across the beast's trail, turning each snare into a potential trap. Not strong enough to hold the Skarlgloom, but enough to snare one of its brood, and if panic set in, enough to twist around a limb or neck. But panic was unreliable. I do not gamble on hope. Each vine I anchored had a secondary purpose. Tripwires strung taut between roots and stones. Each one linked to a concealed dart launcher, the old kind, compact, precise, and deadly. I checked each mechanism, testing the pressure before inserting the dart. Their tips gleamed red with the Scarlet Widow venom, a rare compound that burned hot in the blood and lingered. Even an abomination like the Skarlgloom wouldn't walk away from a dose unscathed. And if it did, I had more waiting. Another hour passed. The rain had deepened into a relentless curtain. Thunder growled closer now, low and rolling, like some ancient creature circling the edge of hearing. I tested my leg again and winced. The bolt sealed the skin cleanly enough, but beneath that thin veneer, I could still feel where muscle had been torn away. Pressing a finger against the wound confirmed what I already suspected. A sickening blend of crushed herb and half-formed tissue squirmed beneath the surface. I chose not to dwell on it. I could run if I had to. I could leap. That was enough. My next task was fortifying the roost from which I would watch the clearing. My perch, my vantage. In most hunts, elevation was a reliable ally. But gloomlings, with their leathery wings and unnatural strength, made a mockery of traditional tactics. They could fly. Truly fly. Their mother, though, the Skarlgloom herself, would be too large to take to the air. Her wings would serve only to propel her leaps, allowing her to crash through trees like a boulder hurled by the gods. So I planned for her children first. I worked swiftly, stringing weird thread nets between the branches around my roost. The silk harvested from phase spiders shimmered faintly in the rain before vanishing from sight, nearly invisible to the naked eye even in daylight. The tension in the line was precise, calibrated to snap tight if anything passed through at speed. Gloomlings rarely walked. They pounced, and these nets would serve well. Next, I unspooled my final contingency. A weighted net of spun dwarven steel, strong enough to stop a charging dire bear, heavy enough to pin even the Skarlgloom, if I could time it right. This one I kept on manual release. I wasn't about to waste it on a whelp. With the traps laid, I climbed into position, settling into a fork of a thick limb high above the ground. The bark was slick with rain. I wrapped my cloak tighter around myself, its chameleon enchantment weaving me into the colors of the foliage and the shadows. Then, methodically, I dipped my remaining arrows into the Scarlet Widow venom, coating each tip with care. 1 drop per arrow, and no more. Below me the clearing darkened. The clouds thickened, and the rain began to pool at the low points of the earth, swallowing leaves and footprints alike. And so I waited. Thunder echoed through the forest, rolling low and long across the treetops. I remained still, breath measured, eyes fixed on the clearing below. My cloak clung to the bark behind me, chameleon weave flickering with each blink of lightning. They did not come with a roar. No mindless charge, and no crashing of limbs or shrieking of fury. The abominations crept. The gloomlings were the first to appear, emerging from the tree line like phantoms, their movements low and cautious. They were predators, yes, but uncertain ones now. They remembered. Somewhere in their malformed minds, they remembered pain. They stalked forward now with unnatural silence, muzzles low, snake-like tails coiling and twitching behind them. I swore under my breath. They walked strangely, too carefully, and I realized too late what I was seeing. They were avoiding the caltrops. Even hidden beneath rain-slicked mud, they spotted the trap, whether by scent, sight, or some other predatory instinct they knew. The largest among them raised its snout, nostrils flaring as it tasted the air. Its ears twitched backwards, a low growl in its chest, low, wet, and guttural. It moved past the fallen corpse and toward my bloodied greaves. So, the bait had worked, at least on one of them. 3 others slinked into the clearing, tongues flickering from their tails, tasting the storm-heavy air. These did not follow the lead of the first. Their heads turned, slowly, directly, toward me. They had caught a trace, however faint, however masked, it was mine, and it had earned their focus. They moved like shadows, slow, uncertain, deliberate. Predators, yes, but not foolish ones. They knew something waited for them. Then she arrived. The Skarlgloom. She slipped into the clearing without a sound despite her size. Easily as large as a warhorse, but broader, her limbs thicker than any wolves. Her body rippled with strength beneath coarse fur and scale. Wings now useless for flight, folded tightly against her flanks. Her long serpent tail coiled around her legs like a second spine. Her head rose just enough to scent the air. Silent, controlled, and terrifying. Behind her came more gloomlings, smaller, younger, the unblooded ones who had yet to hunt without their mother's shadow. They stayed beneath her, tucked close, not out of fear, but reverence. Skarlgloom crept forward, head low, eyes fixed on the corpse of her fallen whelp. Not a sound escaped her, no growl or hiss, only the wet thud of her massive paws shifting in the mud. I drew a slow breath and notched my arrow. My bow creaked softly as I pulled, the string taut with intent. I leveled my aim on the mother. She moved with care, nudging the body of the gloomling with her snout. A beast that deadly would have known the club was long dead from the moment she stepped into the clearing, yet she examined it anyways. Ritual? Mourning? I couldn't possibly guess. Elsewhere in the clearing, the others were closing in, nearing the outer ring of my snares. Any second now. I shifted my focus. Just behind the shoulder, third of the way up from the chest. That was the shot. If I timed it right, the arrow would pierce both lungs and punch a hole through both hearts with one strike. Clean. Instant. But before I loosed the string, the largest gloomling lunged. It surged forward and sank its teeth into the blood-soaked greaves I'd left in the mud. There was a flash of light, blue and searing, and the sound of ice shattering like crystal under a hammer. The rune beneath the bait had ignited. A jagged explosion of glacial force erupted from the earth, the ground splitting apart with a deafening crack. Shards of razor ice blasted outward, tearing the gloomling into ribbons mid-snarl. Blood and frost sprayed across the clearing in an eruption that surged forward, unstoppable and indiscriminate. I watched it race towards the Skarlgloom. In a blur of motion she twisted, jaw snapping around one of her young and hurling herself backward. Her wings flared wide as she leapt, powerful and practiced. Not fast enough, and the ice caught the others. 2 of the young were impaled outright, shards driving through bone, armor, and heart. The third screamed, high, wet, and an awful sound. As a shard tore through its hindquarters, it would die, slowly. There would be time for regret later. The Skarlgloom cleared most of the blast, but not all of it. The outer edges of the frozen eruption hammered her mid-leap. The force wasn't enough to pierce her hide, but it was enough to knock her from the air. She crashed to the ground in a violent heap, wings curled tight around her like a shield, trees groaning with the impact. My shot was gone. The 3 gloomlings stalking me had halted the moment the trap had erupted. A heartbeat later, they howled, sharp, guttural cries that echoed through the clearing. Not of fear, but of recognition. They understood this was a trap. And they knew the strange scent in the air, the one they had been tracking, was the cause. Their eyes locked onto my perch, and they sprinted. Wings flared as they lowered themselves into a charge, preparing to launch skyward. I shifted focus, ignoring them for now. My bow creaked as I loosed the arrow towards the Skarlgloom. She was rising from the mud, having weathered the worst of the ice blast. I aimed for the base of her wing, hoping to cripple her ability to leap. The arrow stuck, too low. It buried itself deep into the muscle of her back, drawing a spray of dark blood but missing anything vital. She let out a roar that cracked across the clearing like a war horn. Her eyes snapped towards me, burning with recognition. Not confusion, and not surprise. Only rage. Then came the twitch in her shoulder, a hitch in her stride. The Crimson Widow venom had taken hold, burning through her veins. And still she moved. One of the gloomlings sprinting towards me tripped into a garrote. The mine snapped tight around its leg with a whip crack. It tumbled violently, just as the dart trap fired. A thin hiss and then a thunk as the dart buried itself deep into its side. The gloomling writhed, thrashing against the vine, but it was too young. Its resilience had yet to solidify, and the venom worked quickly, dragging it into stillness. Its sisters did not pause. They took to the air, wings beating violently as they arced towards the trees. I notched another arrow and loosed it at the Skarlgloom as she surged forward, no longer alone. The cub she had saved from the ice now followed close behind, limping but mobile, blood trailing in its wake. Its breath came in short, rasping bursts, yet it pressed on, driven by instinct or command. The Skarlgloom thundered across the clearing, each stride gouging deep into the sodden earth. Caltrops flew as she trampled over them, several lodging in her paws, but she did not falter. She didn't run in a straight line either. She bounded erratically, zigzagging with brutal momentum, never offering me another clean shot. I lost her in the blur of rain and rising mist, and she was coming right for me. The first glooming tore through the air and into the tree with a shriek of rage. I didn't flinch. My focus remained locked on the Skarlgloom, drawing a bead on my next shot. But before the creature could reach me, it thrashed into one of the weird thread nets that I'd strung through the branches. The near-invisible strands snapped taut, coiling around its wings and limbs. The glooming shrieked as its flight collapsed, and it fell hard, crashing into the underbrush below in a heap of twisted wings and screeching fury. I loosed another arrow. This one struck the Skarlgloom in its shoulder with a satisfying thunk, drawing another furious roar that reverberated through the soaked forest. She stumbled, briefly, but not enough. I reached for another arrow, but there was no time. The final gloomling had seen its path. It followed the exact route the first had taken, and it avoided every single remaining net. Clever little monster. I dropped my bow and drew my dagger with one smooth motion. It came straight for me, jaws wide, serpentine tail flicking wildly behind it. I dropped low against the branch, the beast sailing just overhead, its fangs snapping inches from my throat. As it passed, I slashed upwards, the dagger slicing clean across its neck. The steel caught flesh, bit deep, and blood sprayed as the creature twisted midair. But even in dying, it fought. Its tail lashed out at me as it passed over, the serpent's mouth gaping wide. I jerked back just in time, blade snapping upward again, catching the tail and forcing it aside before it could sink its fangs into my shoulder. Even as it crashed into the branches below, twitching and bleeding, I caught motion from the corner of my eye. The Skarlgloom was airborne. She launched herself at terrifying speed, wings snapping open and thrusting, far higher than any creature her size had a right to travel. She tore through my weird thread nets like they weren't even there, shattering lines and snapping branches in her charge. Below her, the wounded cub still followed, sprinting towards the base of the tree. A snarl twisted its features, desperate to corner me, to close the trap. It never reached the roots. Another garrote vine coiled tight, snapping its legs from under it. The cub hit the ground and didn't rise. I turned back to the Skarlgloom and pulled the release. The dwarven steel net dropped like a thunderclap, wrapping around her just as she closed the final distance. Her wings tangled into the mesh midair. She fell, screaming, the momentum carrying her the last few feet. And then, impact. She slammed into the tree. The sound was deafening, splintering wood, snapping branches, and the groan of something ancient straining under too much force. Even anchored, even braced, I nearly lost my footing. My perch pitched violently, and for the moment, all I could see was a blur of leaves, wood, and gray sky. I caught the trunk, heart pounding and breath short. The Skarlgloom lay below, tangled in steel, surrounded by death, but she was still moving. The Skarlgloom roared, a sound that rattled the trees and punched through my ribs. She thrashed, limbs twisting violently as the dwarf spun steel groaned under the strain. Then, snap! The net gave. Steel cords whipped through the air like broken reins, some spinning off into the mud and others catching on shattered branches. I notched another arrow and fired, barely pausing to aim. There was no time. I leapt from branch to branch, my wounded leg protesting with every landing, making for my secondary roost. I had laced it with traps as well, though far fewer, and it would have to do. Behind me I heard the arrow hit, a wet crack followed by a shriek of rage. I glanced back mid-leap. The shaft had torn through her wing and punched into the earth beyond. She bled now from multiple places, but the wound wasn't enough. She didn't charge. Instead she turned, toward the gloomling caught in a weird thread net. I landed on the new roost, catching myself on the slick bark just as I saw her rip through the enchanted silk. The net unraveled, and the juvenile collapsed onto her side. She let out a deep, resonant howl. The gloomling responded instantly, its own cry cutting through the clearing like a knife. Then it turned and ran. I cursed. If it reached the tree line, if it found a cave or some hollow root system, it would vanish, hibernate, and in a few years it would breed. The whole bloody nightmare would begin again. Another village, another contract. I didn't hesitate. Another arrow, already knocked, and I drew and released. The shot sailed clean through the sheets of rain and struck the gloomling in the hindquarter, burying itself deep. It stumbled and collapsed. Within seconds it was convulsing, foaming at the mouth, its limbs spasming violently. Then, stillness. The poison on my arrow was far stronger than what I'd used on the dart traps. That one wouldn't be getting back up. I exhaled, sharp and cold, one less to worry about. But below, the Skarlgloom still lived, wounded, bleeding, and now truly alone. And she was looking for me. The Skarlgloom howled, a cry so raw and violent that it curdled the blood in my veins. For a moment, instinct clawed at me. Run, it screamed, and I crushed it. There was no more gloomlings, and now she had my full attention. The Skarlgloom staggered in place, foam and blood dripping from her open jaws. Between the blood loss, varium extract, and crimson widow venom, she should have been dead already. Should have been slowing. Instead, she charged again, faster than before. Gone was the careful calculation of earlier. What remained in her eyes was nothing but pure, burning hatred. Rage had replaced intellect. She barreled through the remaining garrote vines, the traps snapping around her limbs like twigs. Darts sank into her flanks, but she didn't slow. She didn't flinch. She was beyond pain now. Then she leapt, straight at me. I saw the opening, chest exposed, heart in line. I loosed the arrow and leapt from the branch, the string humming behind me as I threw myself into open air. The arrow struck home, a dull and heavy thud as it buried itself in her chest, straight into one of her hearts. I crashed into the earth, rolling to break the fall. It worked, mostly. A white-hot spike of pain lanced up my wounded leg, and I cried out as the tear reopened. Blood poured freely, staining the ground beneath me. I forced myself up, vision swimming. The Skarlgloom had plowed through several trees midair before hitting the ground, snapping trunks like dry reeds. But she didn't stay down. Somehow she rose once more. Clawed feet tore into the ground as she steadied herself, blood streaming from her mouth. Her whole body trembled, torn apart by poison and steel, but she stood. Her eyes met mine, and the rage was gone. Not peace, not fear, but cold hatred, tempered by something else. Acceptance. She knew. She knew she was going to die. But she wasn't planning on dying alone. With a final snarl, the Skarlgloom launched herself towards me one last time. I loosed another arrow. It struck her in the chest again, driving deep just shy of the first one. But this time, she didn't even stagger. With a final ragged burst of speed, the Skarlgloom launched herself forward. I tried to drive aside. Tried being the operative word. But the wound in my leg seized with pain, the torn muscle refusing to obey. My foot skidded in the mud instead of pushing off, and I slipped. I fell just enough. Her jaw snapped shut inches from my face, but her massive flank crashed into me, and I hit the ground hard, the world spinning. Before I could rise, her paw slammed into my chest, a boulder of force driving me into the mud. Claws like hooked scimitars punched through my enchanted armor as if it were cloth, tearing jagged furrows into my flesh. I screamed as blood poured from my chest. She roared, face inches from mine, hot, fetid breath blasting across my skin. Her teeth were close enough to tear out my throat in a heartbeat. But she didn't bite. She waited. And in her eyes I saw it. Not the fury of a beast, but the calculated malice. The Skarlgloom wanted me to suffer. Wanted me to die slowly, not by claw, not by fang. By venom. Her tail uncoiled like a snake from behind her bulk. Its viper head rising into view, fangs dripping with black ichor. It hovered above me, poised. An executioner, not a weapon. It should have ended me. Instead, it gave me a chance. As the viper struck, my hand closed around the hilt of my dagger. I drove it upward, straight into the gaping maw of the snake-headed tail, piercing through scale and brain in a single desperate thrust. The serpent convulsed violently and then went limp. The Skarlgloom reared back, howling in agony. The death of its tail sent screaming signals down its nerves, its body twisting and muscles seizing. Blood streamed from the torn mess of my chest as I rolled away, every movement a flare of fire beneath my skin. Mud rushed to fill the wounds, and I choked on a gasp, one hand clutching my side as I tried to rise. I couldn't, not fully. I staggered, nearly falling again, dagger still in hand. The world tilted, lightheaded. Fast, too fast, I was bleeding out. My thoughts scattered like leaves on the wind. But that bite would have killed me faster. I forced my gaze upward, and I braced myself for her final pounce. It would never come. Skarlgloom no longer looked at me. Blood pours from her eyes, her mouth, her nostrils. Thick rivulets dark against her fur. Even her ears bled now, the hemorrhaging accelerating as I watched. She doesn't snarl. She doesn't roar. She turns away. She staggers, away from me, dragging the ruined tail behind her. One heavy step, then another, each slowing to the last. Her limbs trembled with effort. She barely reaches the body of her dead young. Then she collapses. With the last of her strength, she pulls the corpse toward her, clutching it gently in her jaws, dragging it close before curling in around it. A mother's instinct, undiminished even in death. I watched in silence. Only once I'm sure she isn't rising do I reach into my pouch and pull free a small vial. The potion burns on my tongue, but I start to feel the bleeding in my chest slow, the worst of the wounds sealing tight. It would hold, long enough. I didn't care about pain now. I approached her slowly, dagger in hand, my steps heavy with exhaustion and something else. Respect. She doesn't look up at first, just lies there, body quivering, blood soaking into the mud. A whimper escapes her lips, soft and broken. The venom was doing its work, and it would not be a gentle death. Then she turns to look at me. There's no fury left in her eyes, no strength, just the ache of a creature who fought and lost, and understood that. I stand over her and speak the words, not for her, but for me. I'm sorry you were born an enemy of this world, that your life and those of your cubs were destined to end this way. May your next life be one of peace and joy. And then, without hesitation, I strike. The dagger slides cleanly into the base of her skull, and she dies instantly. And so ends the tale of the Skarlgloom and her kin. Do not fret, for Theron's adventures have not ended just yet. We shall see more of him and those like him in future stories. If you enjoyed this saga and wish to hear more like it, please feel free to like and subscribe. And remember, together we shall uncover the truth, for in knowledge lies our strength, and in understanding our path.